Look, some of us just weren't lucky enough to be born with faces. Is there something wrong with that? Well, no, perhaps not, but when those things without faces are also nightmarish creatures that lurk in the dark and smile only on the inside when they see you cringe in terror, then yeah, maybe having no face just ends up being a little creepy. This episode features allegedly true and scary stories about encounters with faceless entities. Remember, if you want me to narrate your stories, send them to me at darkstories.org. I'm looking for search and rescue stories and sightings of cloaked creatures in the woods. Also, check out Freaky Folklore on Spotify or iTunes, so you don't miss the double-length Halloween special on the lore of the werewolf. The comment of the day comes from my previous episode titled 7 Horrifying Paranormal Encounters. A viewer by the username of Julia Sucks at Stuff says, "I love the second story with the friendly ghost grandma. Hauntingly wholesome." My reply? Hauntingly wholesome would make a really good slogan, maybe for cookies infused with ectoplasm or something. Leave an interesting comment on this episode, and I might reply to it in a future episode. Now, let's begin. The Faceless Creature. From Anonymous. I've never told anyone else about this experience, in fear of sounding crazy. I mean, heck, it is crazy. However, I just started listening to this show to lift my spooky little spirit in time for Halloween. It was when I heard a story that sounded strikingly similar to my own that caused me to stop what I was doing. Listening to that episode gave me hope that in fact I'm not crazy. It was a seemingly normal weekend night when my cousin M came to my house to sleep over. For context, we've always had a strong sisterly bond, as we're only a year apart in age and have lived with each other multiple times. Even when we didn't live together, our houses were always 5 to 10 minutes away from each other, so weekly sleepovers were common. We know each other like the back of our hands, so I know when she's serious and when she's messing with me. I was about 14 years old at the time, making her 13 in 2003. Our computer was set up on the left side of our Florida room in the back of the house, while my bedroom was on the right side with a large open space in the middle. The room was connected to our dining room by a sliding glass door with a long row of windows and a bar-like counter. If you were sitting at the computer and turned around, you could see right into the kitchen, as well as the dining room. The only thing separating the computer room from the Florida room was a small half wall that was in the process of being torn down. This is necessary information for the story. As you must know, there is no possible way for M to have pranked me without me seeing what she was up to. We grew up interested in the occult very young, as I had another cousin who was much older, D, who was a Wiccan. I could listen to him talk for hours about all the magical and mystical joys and challenges that came with his religion. I remember asking him about Ouija boards, because I really wanted to use one to attempt to speak to my great-grandma. I was still naive. He quickly and sternly warned me not to touch Ouija boards if I didn't know what I was doing, yet he didn't elaborate. He just told me that if I valued my happiness and my soul, I shouldn't touch one, as I can attract something much darker than Grandma. Of course, I ignored this advice, thinking he was just being dramatic, and secretly bought a Ouija board anyway. M and I became obsessed with that Ouija board, using it often. Extremely stupid, I know. We were being typical teenagers, trolling people on forums and playing games late into the night. At some point, M said she was thirsty and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she shut the sliding door quietly, I could clearly see her retrieve a cup and walk to the fridge. We looked at each other and silently giggled, because she was doing everything in her power not to make any noise. We didn't care to feel my mother's wrath for waking her up at 3 a.m. I turned my attention back to the computer and continued my game. Not even 5 seconds later, I heard a soft scuffling noise coming from behind the half wall. My younger siblings always left toys in that area, which would randomly turn on, so I didn't think much of it. I just figured it was a family spirit or another harmless spirit that decided to once again mess with the toys. I've had so many paranormal experiences I've lost count, so I've become used to it. Although, for some reason, I felt uneasy. I felt dazed and confused. The only time I've ever experienced this feeling was when I went with my grandma to check out an old house for sale. She would always bring me house hunting with her to see if I felt any sort of negative energy, as she said I was still pure and would have stronger senses than herself. Probably not one of her best ideas when I think about it now. I still wish I'd never looked towards that wall. I glanced behind me when I saw M filling her cup in the kitchen, and it then emerged. I could see it slowly crawling from behind the wall in my peripheral vision. I froze, too terrified to rip my gaze from M, who was completely oblivious to what I was seeing. I took a deep breath and dragged my eyes to the creature in front of me. It was faceless, void of eyes and a nose, with gray skin stretched tight around its head. It didn't even have indentations where the eyes were supposed to be. The only distinguishing feature this thing had was a mouth. A wide, human-like mouth sat low on its head, right above where an actual human's chin would be. I think the thing I found most strange about this creature was that it didn't have teeth. No sharp teeth like other people have said, or squared human-like teeth. Just an empty black hole where faint hisses escaped. The faceless thing looked sickly skinny, visibly bony, with long arms. I can't tell you what its lower half looked like. I could only see it from the waist up. And it smiled at me, if you could even call that a smile. I instantly felt a wave of nausea smack me, leaving my head throbbing. All of this happened within seconds. As soon as I looked back at M, she was looking at me curiously. I watched her walk back through the dining room towards the sliding door to come back to me. Once she got to the door, I glanced at the wall, and in the blink of an eye, that thing was gone. I think to myself, how the heck does something just evaporate into thin air? Had I just imagined it? Did M sneak out here really quick with the mask when I wasn't looking? It didn't make any sense to me. M, what the heck is behind that wall? I whispered as she stopped right in front of me, looking confused. What do you mean? She asked, puzzled at my sudden change in behavior. Just toys. Why? Would you like to play with the boppet? She teased and plopped it down next to me. Quit messing with me. I know you're trying to scare me. Well, congrats, you got me this time. I said to her, trying to ease my mind. I'm not one to scare easily, and we were currently having an ongoing prank war. You deserve a cookie for that one. I haven't been that scared since we left the old house. She then turned towards me with a somber look on her face and said, Jay, I didn't do anything. Why would I prank you this close to your mom's room at this time? I'm not trying to get whooped. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, making all my hair stand on end. Seriously, what's up with you? You're acting so weird. She scowled at me and rolled her eyes, taking the mouse from my hand. I sat there dumbfounded, staring at the floor, sneaking a few peeks towards that wall. I finally turned towards her, and in a hushed voice I said, I think we should go back to my room, like right now. And don't touch those toys no matter how often they go off tonight, okay? She was annoyed at this point and started to call me a baby, boasting about how much longer she could stay up. I got up and huffed, choking out words. Fine, you can stand here and play with that thing then. Better hope it doesn't swallow you whole. Her smile disappeared, realizing that I'm not trying to pull a fast one on her. But what are you talking about? She stammered, a look of concern now dawning on her face. Knowing that I have her full attention now, I walked towards my room and coldly told her I meant what I said, that if she wanted to play with that faceless thing, be my guest. Jumping up from her chair, she trailed behind me without another word. Once in my bedroom, we both sat on my bed as I explained what I saw. A look of horror crossed her face when she realized I was being serious. She asked, "Do you think us playing with that board has anything to do with this?" I responded, "I wish I could tell you, but I just don't know what it was. We should get rid of that board, just to be safe." She agreed, and we planned to burn it the next day. We didn't fall asleep until the sun came up, too afraid of what might be lurking in the dark. As we had agreed, we burned the board in our fire pit outside once we woke up. I stole my mom's huge container of salt and poured it around the fire pit to form a circle. As it burned, I boldly stated, "You are not welcome here. Go back to where you came from and never show your face here again. This is my home. Mine." M glanced at me, kind of giggling, and asks, "Do you really think that'll work?" "It's worth a shot, right?" I said, with a small forced smile, completely unsure if it would or not. I haven't seen the faceless thing in my home since then, although every once in a while I'll have a dream featuring the notorious Faceless Creature. Every time it enters my dreams, it only hisses out one sentence that drives me crazy and always infuriates me. "You're mine, mine." These dreams no longer frighten me, as I can now tell the difference between my dreams and reality. I always shout at the creature, "These are my dreams, you have no power here." Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but a girl can try. I've come to terms that I may have my own personal demon, or cryptid, attached to me, which is fine, as long as it leaves him and her family alone. I no longer care. The Staircase, from Anonymous. I was walking my girlfriend home one night when we crossed the busy 4-lane street as we do every day. There's a library on the right, closest to said street, and behind that library, there's a community center for the city people to hold events like basketball games and stuff like that. The library and community center are connected by a short wooded set of stairs. As my girlfriend and I were passing the stairs, I happened to look over across the street, and at the stairs I noticed a mass under them that wasn't usually there. I brushed it off and didn't say anything to my girlfriend about it. I continued to walk her home. I stayed at her place for about 3 hours. By 11 p.m., I began my walk home. I didn't live far from her, maybe 3 to 4 minutes away. I came out of her alley, right in front of the community center and that set of stairs. I looked back over at the stairs to see if that mass was still there. It was. I just assumed it was a trash bag or something like that. As I got to the busy street I mentioned before, I waited for there to be a break in the long line of cars for me to cross. While I was waiting, I glanced behind myself, considering I was on a less busy 1-lane street. I wanted to check if any cars were trying to turn onto the busy street. As I turned, I saw a long, skinny black thing roll out from under the wooden steps, as then another rolled out, matching the length of the first. The black, stick-like things bent outward like arms and pulled the rest of the black mass out from under the steps. At least 10 feet tall, the human-like figure started to turn my way as I stood there, with my knees trembling and my vision going blurry. I stepped onto the once busy street. Then I realized the road was suddenly now completely dead. Not a car in sight, not a single streetlight or store light on. The only thing with any light was my phone, as it lit up with a text I received from my girlfriend that I just dropped off. As my phone lit up, I noticed I couldn't see anything, like I was standing close to something. I turned my phone around, screen facing away from me, so I could see. As I did, my hand hit something, and I dropped my phone. Stepping back, I realized the thing I'd hit was that mass that had slithered out from the steps. Frozen, I bent down and picked up my phone from the ground, and I backed away until I tripped over a curb backwards. I stood back up and I walked as fast as I could and as calmly as I could back home, afraid of running in case I excited the mass into a chase. I live in a 3-story house with an above-ground basement. I walked up my concrete steps, leading to my front door and passing my patio that continues on from the living room. I walked into the house and stumbled onto the floor just after locking the door. After a good 5 or 6 seconds pass, I sit back up and I peer through the glass patio door, and I see the mass. It was just crouched on the far side of the patio railing, staring at me, faceless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, only ears. Long, white, pointed ears. It was making a drawn-out clicking noise while sitting like a cat on my patio railing. I slowly stood up and flipped the lock on the door. As the lock clicked loudly, the mass shot up on both feet while still on the railing and leapt and landed onto my front yard. It then vaulted over the metal gate. As the thing disappeared into the distance, all the lights around outside flipped back on as the clicking faded. Keep in mind, the thing jumped at least a story high and into my yard. The fall to the ground from there is 4 stories, and it ran off with no problem. I called and told my girlfriend what happened, and she just called me crazy. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still gutted every time I see those wooden steps that I have to pass by every day. Faceless Person from Horror Lover 24163. I'm here to talk about the strange happenings that happened to me at my house. I live in a small town about 45 minutes outside of Boulder. It's a very peaceful town, almost no crime. I moved here about 3 years before this event. It all began one faithful night when I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at my clock. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't figure out what woke me up, so I sat up and listened. I didn't hear anything, so I lay back down, trying to go back to sleep. Right as I was dozing off, I heard footsteps downstairs. I ran out of my room and looked down off the banister, which gave me a full view of the foyer and part of the hallway in the downstairs. Then I heard this strange, faint, almost ethereal whispering. This kept happening throughout about a month until one night. I woke up once more, but my house seemed to be in a light haze. I looked at my clock. Lo and behold, it was 3 a.m. I got up to get a glass of water, and as I did, the color of skin or flesh caught my eye. I looked at my bed, and there I was. I saw myself sleeping in my bed still. I was extremely confused, so I tried to wake up my sister in the room across from mine. I tried shaking her covers, but when I would grab at them, they would just slip out of my hand. I walked back into my room, and I froze in terror. There, sitting in my desk chair, was a figure staring at the wall in front of the desk. He slowly turned his head to stare right at me, and I swear, he almost had no face. The reason I say almost was because it looked like he might have had a face, but it was under a thick layer of skin. He slowly stood up and walked over to my sleeping self as I just stood there and watched. He bent down and stared at my sleeping body for 10 seconds straight. Then he jolted up, looked out my window, then sprints out the door and down the stairs. Suddenly, I wake up back in my bed, and I could hear footsteps running down the stairs. I even heard the door open and slam shut. I heard this ghastly scream of a man and a horrible guttural howl. My parents ran out of their room and checked around the house, then ran up to check on me and my sister. It's been about a year since this happened, and I still have trouble sleeping at night. Nothing has happened since, and I've only told my closest friends about this experience, never my parents. I hope someone can give me an explanation, because it seemed to me that something far more horrible made that thing in my room run for its life. He has no face. From Kitkatrearea. To start, I'm not saying this person I'm writing about doesn't have a face. I'm sure he does. I've just never seen it. The incidents began at the end of November of 2017. My aunt who raised my sister and I raised us in this town and still lives here about 9 blocks away from where I live now. My daughter and I used to visit her overnights on the weekends. Now, my place was usually pretty spotless, other than the odd task here and there, like running the dishwasher, forgetting to take out the garbage, to folding the laundry. Just small things, really. However, sometimes when I'd return home, I'd notice things were cleaner than how I left them. For example, I left to my aunt's one weekend for an overnight, and I'd forgotten to replace the toilet paper roll before I left. When I returned, I'd noticed that there was a new roll in the washroom, and that it looked as though someone had used the shower as the tub was still a little wet, and I could faintly smell Axe or Old Spice in the washroom. When I walked into the living room, I noticed the brown fabric couch had been vacuumed. I tried not to think too much of it, as I can spook easily, especially after what happened at the previous place where my neighbors across the hall and their friends broke into my place and trashed it. Small things like this happened for a while. Not too often, though. A couple of months later, towards the end of January of 2018, whoever it was decided to step up their game, per se. For the longest time, my bed was up against a wall facing the closet, so when I'd lay down, I'd have a clear view of the hallway that led to the front door, and I could see almost everything. One night, I was awakened from a dead sleep by the sound of footsteps on the rug in the room. Here's where I regret not opening my eyes to see who it was. Instead, I naturally assumed it was my daughter, looking to crawl into bed with me. I thought nothing more of it, and I just lay there. I was close to the outer side of the bed, waiting for her to go to the end of the bed and crawl in. However, instead, I felt a hand press down on the mattress, which alarmed me. The force that was applied was that of someone who was an adult. I heard the person lean over me, causing me to open my eyes. I was still super tired, so I didn't register much at the time. My eyes were greeted to a shirt in my face that smelled like a warm campfire, like a woodsy scented cologne, which I can't remember the name of, but I learned my friend's dad uses it a lot. It's also higher end. The person must have been reaching for either the poem I wrote or the book I was reading that I'd sat down in the bed next to me before passing out. Being super tired, I still somehow closed my eyes to go back to sleep, not really registering that a stranger was in my apartment. I can't say how long my eyes were closed, but finally, my mind was like, crap, someone broke in. When I fully jolted awake, they were gone. In June of 2018, the landlord I had at the time had her husband training a new maintenance guy. I'd walked downtown one day to pick up my daughter's new glasses, and when I returned, there was water everywhere on my bathroom floor. Jess was his name. The guy that accompanied him was Bob. Jess and Bob arrived and took a look at the damage. Bob asked how the metal piece connecting the toilet to the wall came undone, as it had to be unscrewed. I honestly admitted I had no clue. Jess then sent Bob downstairs to the maintenance room to grab a certain tool that was needed to fix it. Once he left, I was greeted with awkward silence, so I went to the kitchen to find a snack. After a couple of minutes of silence, Jess asked if I knew of anyone who had a spare key to my place, to which I replied, "Not that I'm aware of. Why do you ask?" Jess went silent, and for the remainder of summer until he left at the end of August, he did not speak another word to me. Over the next few years, stuff like things going missing, like makeup, earrings, necklaces, hairbrushes, my body sprays, would go missing. At times I would return to my door, being unlocked. I'd left for the night to go to a friend's and would return to notices for noise complaints on my door. One of the more chilling incidents occurred in May of 2018. I had undergone day surgery. My friend and her kids came to stay to help me out. One night, my friend was sleeping on the couch. I was fast asleep in bed. She wasn't sure why she woke up, but she did, and when she looked down the hallway, she saw someone leave and assumed it was me going for a nighttime walk. I did enjoy those when I got the chance. She did note, though, that she thought I was dressed strangely. I'm mostly alternative, rocker, emo, goth kind of style, and the person was dressed in a white shirt and blue jeans with a ball cap. They were medium built and roughly 6'3" from what she could remember. I don't wear hats except for toques, and most of my wardrobe consists of black or other various dark colors and skinnies, along with some yoga pants and sweats. Definitely not brightly colored blue jeans that seemed a bit baggy at the bottom. After my friend saw that person, I was quick to install a security camera with night vision, but had never actually caught any footage of the person. Once I set it up, the activity stopped altogether, until shortly after I took the camera down. I had my locks changed. I had the landlord do random checks on my place when I'd leave for more than a night. Heck, I even went through the lengths of having my friends over who would stay up most of the night to try and catch this person. I should also note that I do have cats, so the powder on the floor thing doesn't work. No matter what I tried, I couldn't seem to catch this guy. I know it's a guy too. I once went out for the day with my daughter and friend, and when I came back, I went to change, but my entire wardrobe in the closet stunk of that woodsy warm campfire-scented cologne. Not to mention, men's sweats have randomly showed up in my laundry, along with a really large men's shirt. Fast forward to January of 2020, the night before my daughter's dad came over to visit for a few days. A friend had just recently moved into the same building, so I was at her place until late at night. My daughter had passed out on her couch, so she was moved into her son's bed, who was away at his dad's for a few days. I came home alone and crawled into bed. I have neighbors who are loud at night, so I've been listening to stuff on YouTube to help me sleep. On this particular night, I'd fallen asleep listening to something. At some point I woke up, so I rolled over to go back to sleep. My back was now facing the outside of the bed. Shortly after closing my eyes, I felt someone sit on my bed. At first, I wasn't alarmed. I assumed it was my friend who had a spare key, and my daughter who had issues sleeping over at her place, and is often brought home between 2 to 3 a.m. So I just lay still with my eyes shut, waiting for her to speak. But instead, there's silence. After a few moments of silence, I realized it wasn't my daughter, and I began to grow scared. I was aware I should have turned to see who it was, but I admit I'm a chicken. So I lay still, not moving, unsure of what to do. However, my body decided to betray me, and gave me one of those random pains causing me to quietly say ow, which alerted the person that I was awake. Whoever they were, they just took off. A few days passed, and it was the last night of my daughter's father being over. I'd gone late night skating at around 11 p.m. and returned around midnight. Me and her dad talked for a good while, playing catch-up, as he had recently came back into her life. By 1:40 a.m., I noticed while I was yapping away, he had directed his attention towards the kitchen. I of course kept talking until I was shushed for a second time. "What's wrong?" I asked, sounding rather spooked. My daughter's dad, who I'll name Joe, didn't say anything. He held a finger to his lips, motioning me to remain silent. After a couple of minutes, Joe got up and walked over to the front door, looking out the peephole before opening it. He looked out into the hall and then closed the door. "Joe, what's wrong?" I asked him again. Joe sat down and quietly asked, "You forgot your keys up at your friend's, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, but she's been asleep since around 11:30. Joe made a curious noise before looking back at the kitchen. "That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure, which means I just heard your lock being picked." A chill ran up my spine, and tears welled up in my eyes. After that night, I would come to find a men's ring in my living room, as well as something wrapped around my smaller cat's neck that I had to cut off. There would be minor break-ins as well, but the last incident happened back in March of 2020. Luckily, nothing since has happened. Not that I'm aware of, and I hope that faceless man is gone.